Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back for the plenary. We'll now start the 2024 Imperatives and Interfaith Contributions. Senhoras e senhores, bem-vindos de volta para a plenária Imperativos de 2024 e Contribuições Interreligiosas. I invite to the stage its moderators. Eu convido ao palco os seus moderadores. Rodrigo Vitorino Souza Alves, Chair of the Local Organizing Committee for IF20 Brazil 2024, Director of the Brazilian Center for Studies in Law and Religion, and Professor of Law at the Federal University of Uberlandia. Coordenador Nacional do IF20 Brasil 2024, pesquisador líder do Centro Brasileiro de Estudos em Direito e Religião e professor de Direito da Universidade Federal de Uberlândia. Father Charles Chilufya, Director of Justice and Ecology Office of the Jesuit Conference of Africa and Madagascar. Diretor do Escritório de Justiça e Ecologia, Conferência Jesuíta da África e Madagascar. I also invite to the stage the following panelists. Também convido ao palco os seguintes painelistas: David Beckmann, Circle of Protection and President Emeritus of Bread for the World, Círculo de Proteção e Presidente Emérito da Bread for the World. Eric LeCompte, Executive Director at the Jubilee USA Network, diretor executivo da Jubilee USA Network. David Saperstein, Senior Advisor for Policy at the Union for Reform Judaism, conselheiro sênior de política da União pelo Judaísmo reformista. Chief Dr. Doliwura Zakaria, Chairman at the African Union Interfaith Dialogue Forum, presidente do Fórum de Diálogo Interreligioso da União Africana. Cardinal Damasceno Assis, Archbishop of Aparecida in Brazil. Cardeal Damasceno Assis, arcebispo de Aparecida, no Brasil. E Elcior Santana, who will join us virtually. He's an adjunct professor at Georgetown University. Elcior Santana, ele se juntará a esse seleto grupo virtualmente. Ele é professor adjunto da Universidade de Georgetown. I now turn over the conduction of this plenary to the moderators. Eu passo agora a condução desse painel aos moderadores para essa sessão plenária.
Muito obrigado, Romana. Thank you so much. So I'm very glad to be the moderator of this session on imperatives and interfaith contributions. So we are a little bit short on time for before the lunch. So I'm sure everyone is expecting to have lunch very soon. So we'll try to stick to the times that we have already agreed. So we have someone. Can you just show your hands, Sara and Victoria? So they will be helping us here with the time. And we have this exceptional panel here to discuss important issues, and especially related to the crises and challenges that we face these days, from different sources, and within this global context that we live and we have here represented. So I will turn the microphone to our first panelist, David Beckmann.
The coalition that I coordinate is the Circle of Protection. It's an advocacy coalition of U.S. church bodies that together they include 100 million people. And we try to get the Congress to protect and expand money for things that help poor people. And then Bread for the World is a grassroots, faith-based advocacy movement of 500,000 active people across the United States and 1,000 congregations. This session is about setting priorities. There's so many things that need doing. I see as many speakers have said in different ways, that the revival of progress against hunger and poverty is a foundational priority for faith leaders. It's the first of the 5 priorities that the Forum leadership has set for us, and it has clear connections to the other 4 priorities. Over the last several decades, the world has made unprecedented progress against hunger and poverty. In 1990, 2 of 5 people in the world lived in extreme poverty. Right today, it's less than 1 in 10 people in the world who live in extreme poverty. This is an extraordinary liberation that we've been through. I see it as a great exodus. It's an exodus, like the exodus of the Bible. It's an experience of God in contemporary history. And I believe that God is urging us to keep it going. But progress against hunger and poverty has now stalled. In some respects, it's been reversed. Yet past successes have taught us a lot about what works. We know how to get progress going again. Our main problem is that the governments and people of the world have other priorities now. Our lack of political will, or wobbly political will, is the binding constraint. Faith leaders can help to change this situation. First, by teaching what all of our religions have to say about the importance of action and advocacy for the most vulnerable. Sadly, a lot of religious people are oblivious to issues of social justice and sometimes opposed to social justice. Second, the faith community can help to build push organizations, advocacy organizations, for example, or organizations that represent disadvantaged people. This year's G20 summit will launch an international push organization, the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. President Lula proposed it and sees its launch as the main business of this year's summit. An intergovernmental task force has developed plans that will allow the alliance to mobilize funds and knowledge from governments and financial institutions, and then to connect those funds and knowledge to effective programs and policies. Just last month, a minister-level meeting unanimously approved the launch of the alliance. The launch will be at the G20 summit in November. They aim to get more than 100 governments to submit statements of commitment, their own commitment, and then to join the alliance by the time of the summit. To get 100 governments to take action in a few months is no small task. So I suggest that this year's Interfaith Forum should help recruit governments to the Global Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty. We might express our support in publicity work we do together, or all of us can talk about nobody around the world's heard about it yet, so we can talk about it on our social media so that there's some buzz around this opportunity. Some of us have contacts or networks that can encourage our own governments to make serious statements of commitment to overcome hunger and poverty and to join the alliance. If you can recruit a government that is not a member of the G20, that would be especially helpful. I think about our friends at the African Union Commission, for example. I also suggest that the Faith Forum set up a process to keep track, to hear from us about what we're doing on this issue, and then to sum it up for all of us. If the people in this room can recruit just 5 governments to join the Alliance Against Hunger and Poverty, that would be a significant change in the momentum to the world's movement to overcome hunger and poverty. Obrigado.
Thank you very much, David. And now we'll hear Eric LeCompte.
Thank you, Rodrigo. And thank you, David. I think David raises a very important point and a way that we can take responsibility as the forum, and also the reality that such an alliance, the G20, not only will need to start, but deliver the money for. It's a real gift to be here with you today. I really want to thank the organizers again for the last 10 years in terms of building a very formidable forum to bring the critical voice of faith to bear on some of the most crucial decisions of our time. For us, as we talk about the G20, our story really begins several thousand years ago. Tens of thousands of years ago. And it begins with talking about the Hebrew and Christian scriptures. Really, what I'm going to share with you today is a very simple message with some complicated details. But the heart of the message begins in creation. And that's the reality that our loving Creator, our God, loves us so much that God created a rich and abundant world for us. And we're closest to God, we're closest to the Creator when we're sharing those resources amongst us. In the very early stories, endemic to so many of our religious traditions, God calls for a continual process to protect all of us from becoming too rich or too poor. The story begins in the law books, in the Torah, where we talk about the Jubilee promise or the Jubilee message. Every 7 years, debts are to be forgiven. Every 7 years, people are to return to their ancestral lands. Every 7 years, the land should be allowed to rest, to protect the environment and allow our God to be able to provide directly to us and for us. Every 7 years, the slaves should be set free. And every 7 times 7 years, the 49th year, the 50th year, the great year of Jubilee, is the time of God's great restoration, where we enact a continual process that protects our planet and protects all of us from having too much or too little. These stories were so important to the early believers. There are some scholars who argue there were Hebrew communities of close to 100,000 people that lived very literally for a time by these particular books. While that's argued, we do know that the prophets continued to come to remind people when they were not living in the laws of Jubilee, when they were not living in a continual process where we are sharing God's abundance among us. These stories then became the foundational message and mission for Jesus. In the Gospel of Luke, his first public act at the synagogue, he picks up the scripture and he reads from Isaiah. He reads from the Jubilee text. Every 7 years, debts to be forgiven. Every 7 years, slaves be set free. And he says, in your hearing, this promise is now fulfilled. And we know from the text that the people that gathered there that day are bewildered. Isn't this the day laborer? And this guy's telling us that he is here to end all inequality today? It's that very message that then, 2,000 years later, as we celebrated the birth of Jesus Christ in Jubilee 2000, where we moved forward as the global faith community, Jewish, Christian, and Muslim leaders, with calls from Pope John Paul II to win more than $130 billion in debt relief for the world's poorest countries. Right now, 54 million kids are going to school in Africa who never would have seen the inside of a classroom. But because of our work as the faith community and faith leaders, we were able to change global policies, not only to deliver aid, but to challenge corruption and lift the important promise of transparency. As we gather here today, as ministers gather this year for the G20 in Brazil, Jews, Christians, and Muslims around the world now prepare for the next Jubilee year, the official Jubilee year of Jubilee 2025. In June, Pope Francis invited us to join him in Rome. And also, a part of our small group that gathered with the Holy Father, we were joined by the finance minister of Brazil, Haddad. And at that particular meeting, Pope Francis laid out the vision of many religious leaders as Christians celebrate 2,025 years since the birth of Christ. He laid out that not only is this time of prayer important, but the prayer can only move forward if people of faith, if religious leaders are willing to take action again for Jubilee 2025. And this is where the finance minister from Brazil was so critical and important in this meeting in Rome, because he said now is the time that we must move forward and end to poverty. We must address inequality, and we must protect our planet. Pope Francis laid out, again, echoing the call of Pope John Paul II, of prior Christian, Jewish, and Muslim leaders. Pope Francis said the G20 needs to do three things. The G20 and G7 needs to do three things this year and next year. Number one, we need to move forward debt relief. And not only that, what Pope Francis called for was a Jubilee shift to the entire financial system, echoing his major speech to the United Nations in 2015. What I like to tell people is that speech that Pope Francis made in 2015 was the most important speech he ever gave that no one understood. Because he lays out talking about the problems of economics, of debt, and the lack of processes that we have in place to protect people. And only by framing our world in economics, then does Pope Francis talk about climate, conflict, and human trafficking. These are very, very critical issues that he lifted and he's raised again. And not only is he calling for massive debt relief to be able to fund all of the things we need for around the world, he wants a continual process in place so that countries will never face debt crisis again. This particular process has been debated and considered by the G20. In the early year of the pandemic, they enacted a new debt relief process called the Common Framework. But so far, this new debt relief process has not delivered. It has not been able to cut the debts enough in the world's poorest countries. So we need to enact a process that works to protect all countries and all people from becoming too rich or too poor. The second thing that Pope Francis called for was sufficient economic aid to end poverty, to address inequality, and to protect our planet. Again, the G20 is the decision maker on these global aid policies. The biggest aid policy that we moved forward over the last few years as a faith community was winning $650 billion in currency called special drawing rights that we know from our research with our partners in Africa had huge impacts in delivering on healthcare, anti-poverty, and preventing many governments from actually collapsing. Special drawing rights, again, is being debated right now by the G20. Again, we need to push them to deliver more on these kinds of economic aids. Right now, the G20 is talking about the multilateral development banks. The multilateral development banks, the Africa Bank, the Asia Bank, the Caribbean Bank, are the closest institutions to people in poverty and people in need. We need to recapacitate these particular institutions by hundreds of billions of dollars a year to be able to deliver grants and cheap money to countries to end poverty and to protect our planet. And the third area that Pope Francis called for in June was that now we must address climate debt. We must raise the money for climate mitigation and adaptation, and it's not the United Nations that will make the decision about where the hundreds of billions of dollars comes from for climate finance. Again, it's the G20 that will make this vital decision. The reality is the North owes a debt to the South, as Pope Francis has explained so well, because the process of industrialization, where we in the North took resources to develop and create great wealth in the North, also caused great poverty and environmental degradation in the South. So the G20 must work to raise the resources so that we can address these particular issues of climate finance. As we gather here as the Interfaith Forum, I think we have a special task in fulfilling the Jubilee promise. The reality that the G20 can and will make decisions with our voices to create continual process to prevent all of us from living with too little or too much. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eric, for your
That was great. Thank you both. Here, with your indulgence, I can turn pages and with it on my lap, so I'm going to do it from here. I was asked to set a little bit of the interfaith context of everything that we're doing in a sense of the urgency of this task. Now, we live in an extraordinary moment. More multi-faith, interfaith dialogues and cooperations and interfaith institutions and structures than at any point in human history. And two great benefits. One, when we work together and we do it well, we can do things together none of us could do alone. Secondly, through interfaith dialogue and understanding that comes from through cross-cultural religious literacy, through an effort to work cooperatively that builds trust between us, we build resistance and resiliency against extremists who want to tear us apart. We stand up for each other against hate crimes. We stand for each other to protect each other. We work together to change our societies into more just, more fair, more compassionate societies. That's indispensable for the goals that we have. But I want to set the context for what Dr. King said of the fierce urgency of now. We live at an extraordinary moment in all of human history because of our technology. Our problems aren't new. The consequences of getting them wrong today are different than at any point in human history before us. If we blow it this time, we're not going to have the opportunity to learn from our mistakes and get it right. This is the generation that must get it right. We have always had these ravages of warfare, right? But not the kind of warfare that can tear apart and cause such devastation and destroy the world as we know it. We've always had the problem of threats to our water and our air and our environment here, and the concomitant responsibility to protect God's creation when God has entrusted us our stewardship, but not when matched with the prospects of climate change and ravaged rainforest and rising sea levels and escalating destruction of species of life and overpopulation, when together threaten to irrevocably alter the climate of the globe. And we've always had intrusions into our privacy, repression of free speech, and persecution of our religious lives, but not when matched with the kind of technology that can make Orwell's nightmare of 1984 the reality of the world and take away our freedom so devastatingly. We've always lived with the reality of economic injustice. Some of the Bibles, and so every one of the religious traditions here that we've heard is committed to leave none behind, to ensure that the least of us, to ensure that the most vulnerable, the elderly and the children, the poor and the sick, that all are taken care of, all are lifted up together. That moral voice is being important at the COP conferences and in our national governments to ensure that the poor, who, as Mary Robinson said, did so little to create the environmental crisis, are not left behind in the ability to mitigate and adapt as everyone else does. And we have contributed so much to the peace processes in the world and peace building and in transitional justice after nations have been torn apart. We provide an ethic of responsibility to generations yet to come. One of a religion's greatest contributions to moral thought in the world. We provide a theology and institutional base for reconciliation between people. We have so much to give in confronting these problems, and we've always had the challenge of how to apply new technologies in an ethical and moral manner, but not when matched with genetic engineering and artificial intelligence that allow us to create entire new forms of life and alter human life itself. Many of you or your parents have lived to see an era in which humanity has managed to find out how to smash the atom, crack the genetic code, pierce the veil of outer space itself. And my friends, in a world in which we can do almost everything what we should do, the moral question becomes the single most important question facing humanity. On that, the religious traditions, with all their history, all their wisdom over these ages that the sages of our traditions have given us, have so much to offer at this vital crossroads of humanity. Will we use our wisdom, wealth, and technology to help nations resolve their differences peacefully, or destroy the world in a nuclear holocaust? To clean up the damage to our environment and protect it for generations yet unborn, or to spoil and devastatingly contaminate it? To enhance those freedoms so essential to democracy, to allowing people to find spiritual fulfillment, or degrade and diminish them? To share God's wealth equitably and fairly with all God's children, or deny justice to the billions living without adequate resources, ignoring the warning of the Jewish Talmud 2,000 years ago that the sword enters the world because of justice delayed and justice denied? Will use genetic engineering to cure birth defects, or create Hitler's master race? The one thing I know with certainty is that someone will decide, and our only decision is whether we will be the audience watching those decisions or the authors of those decisions. And we are a source of hope. We live in an extraordinary moment for that same technology. The first generation that produces enough food to feed every one of God's children on earth. A failure to do it now is a failure of moral vision and political will. We have the ability to cure diseases, malaria and other diseases, prevent pandemics that have plagued humanity from time immemorial. A failure to do it now is a failure of moral vision and political will. We have the ability to save the environment and God's creation. A failure to do it is a failure of moral vision and political will. And at such a time as this, the voice of the religious community, that moral voice of hope for all humanity, is needed more than ever. So go forward with courage, for ours is an awesome agenda that can transcend challenges and smash limitations and make the vision that God has entrusted to our care the reality of every human being on earth.
Thank you very much, David. And now I give the floor to Chief Doliwura Zakaria.
Thank you.
Is that correct?
That's correct.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Permit me to also stand on existing protocols. In 2010, the African Union recognized the role of faith leaders in ensuring peace and development across the continent. I am humbled to state that in November 2023, member states made up of 55 countries were called upon to elect a 12-member steering committee made up of 10 representing members and 2 members representing women and youth. I am glad to say that I was elected as the steering committee chairperson for the committee. And looking around, I'm not sure the African Union is wrong in coming up with the Interfaith Dialogue Forum. When there are any form of conflict, trouble, people have to run to faith-based organizations for refuge. Therefore, bringing them together to help the union to be able to get sustainable peace within the continent, I think is the right calling. And if you look at the work that most of religious leaders have done across the African continent, I think it's only appropriate that they have agreed to come out with it. Interfaith dialogue promote positive and cooperative interactions between people of different religions, faith, and spiritual beliefs, with the aim of promoting understanding between different religious bodies to increase acceptance and tolerance in their day-to-day dealings. In today's world, the ability to foster interfaith dialogue is an obvious imperative for peace building if we have to move forward. Now let's look at the imperative interfaith contributions. 1, peace building and conflict resolution. Effective peace building goes beyond the cessation of violence. It involves addressing the root causes of conflict, promoting justice, and building sustainable peace. Secondly, countering extremism. Interfaith initiatives are crucial in countering religious extremism and radicalization. By promoting mutual respect and understanding, be it global or local threats posed by extremism, undermines peace, security, and social cohesion. Extremism, whether religious, political, ideological, can lead to violence, terrorism, and erosion of fundamental human rights as we are seeing around the world. Thirdly, promoting human rights and dignity. Every individual deserves to be treated with respect and fairness, as argued out by my earlier speakers. Interfaith contributions are key in addressing the issue through collective effort to prevent religious persecutions, discrimination, and inequality. As we know, human dignity is the cornerstone of human rights. It reflects the intrinsic worth of every person and is the foundation upon which all human rights are built. Therefore, promoting human dignity means recognizing and affirming the value of every individual life and dignity. Now, let's proceed and look at what can we do to achieve interfaith dialogue. 1, humanitarian effort. Interfaith dialogue collaboration have led to impactful humanitarian efforts, such as providing aid during natural disasters, conflicts, by supporting and providing shelter, food for the underprivileged, all those going through difficulties. This joint effort demonstrates the power of diverse communities working together for a common good. 2, educational and health institutions. If you look around, especially using my country, Ghana, as an example, most of the educational and health institutions, over 30%, are owned by religious bodies. Even when public sector organizations go on strikes, they still remain very important and provide valuable services to the people. Climate action. Interfaith organizations, in advocating for environmental protection and sustainability, significantly leveraging faith teachings to promote positive climate action. We can find faith leaders in all hamlets, in all communities, and therefore their teachings is one of the key ways if we want to overcome climate change. Finally, on public policy and advocacy. Interfaith groups have contributed to shaping public policy on crucial issues such as social justice, poverty alleviation, and social protection. By bringing moral and social cohesion arguments to the table, interfaith efforts have brought about a concrete intervention to address inequality and general peace building in many countries. And another example, since the 1992 Constitution of the Ghanaian Republic, it is clear that coming up with an interfaith-based organization we refer to as Peace Council, where members were elected based on their ability, has helped our country for the past 30 years to be a democratic country. And I think it's worth emulating. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Chief Zakaria. And now I turn the floor to Elcior Santana, who is participating online. Right? Is everything all right? Okay. And yeah, so there he is. Thank you very much, Elcior, for your patience, and we're sorry for being a little bit late. I know that you were waiting for us. Can you hear us? Yep. All right.
Can you hear?
Yes, now we can hear you. Thank you so much. We can see you and hear you.
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. We firstly, I would like to thank the organizer for the opportunity to be here with you guys, and I think this meeting is something very special and very important. I mean, contrary to what some people believed in the 19th century and next century, that religion loses strength. Actually, religion remained a powerful force in the 21st century. I think this meeting is in the work that the organization group, your organization group, is a confirmation of this. And I think there are many issues where the community of faith can contribute, but for the benefit of time, I will try just to concentrate on 3 interrelated issues. The first is debt. And as our colleague has reminded us, Pope Francis has made this key issue in his speech at the UN and in many other speeches, because he understands the implication and the consequences of the issue of the debt. The debt in the global south is elevated, which is a fact that's acknowledged by multilateral financial institutions and everybody else. Several factors have exacerbated. I would say the pandemic, the trade disruptions, the excess of liquidity, leading to a near zero interest rates, and now a steep rise in the U.S. interest rates, which has driven debt service costs in developing countries to unexpected, unsustainable levels. It's important to recall one element that contributed to the 98 debt crisis that resulted in a lost decade in Latin America. Was the increasing interest rates by the bank that moved the interest rates from 6 to 22%. We risk now to repeat the same loss that the interest rates in the U.S. and followed by the world is at record levels, and there is a serious risk related to this. Nevertheless, there are some solutions that are also tying to the climate finance issue. I would say that a conditional investment trust funds, for instance, could involve a swapping debt for climate finance, thereby reducing the debt burden while generating genuinely new and additional funds, which has not actually been happening. And then we got to the second point, which the climate finance. The idea of additional climate finance has been extremely limited, has failed, and the core issue lies in the lack of consensus on definition and accounting methods. But without this, transparency, monitoring, and accountability remains impossible. And it's even worse. This ambiguity has led to legal pressing, and researchers have found that in funds previously allocated to essential areas like health and education have been redirected to meet climate finance targets. The outcome is not new additional finance, but mere reallocation of existing resources. This dysfunction is actually rooted in global governance issue, where the voices of global south scarcely heard in those institutions. And having worked in multilateral institutions for 20 years, I can attest that despite highly competent people, professionals, the overall performance of those institutions often falls short. The analytical training board use is frequently outdated, and project implementation can deviate from original objectives, sometimes turning into a pay-to-play scheme, where procurement process become opaque yet crucial. I think this cognitive dissonance stems from an imbalance in decision-making power, where global south voices are hardly heard, And while geopolitical shifts, I would say tectonic shifts are happening, we know that's not going to happen overnight. Nevertheless, as the old phrase says, keep pushing forward, and changes are possible. And faith-based institutions have an important role to play in this transformation. Concretely, I think that some of the issues raised by the speakers should be emphasized. The idea of reinforcing an institution that could globalize at the hand first. It's important in order to have the institutional level and institutional leverage to influence policies and to help G20 to decide in the right direction. So I think you all have a very important role, and I hope you use it to take care of the problem that we have been discussed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Elcior Santana. And we'll be able to discuss further the Alliance Against Hunger in one of the panels. We'll have one of the representatives of the Ministry of Social Development who is working on the leadership of this very important alliance. So we've heard about several issues here this morning or almost afternoon, right? Or afternoon, on hunger, the debt challenges, environmental issues, climate finance, challenges of technological development, and also the importance of the moral voice of religious communities and the role of faith leaders, as it has been recognized, for example, by the African Union, as it was mentioned before. So, although we are behind schedule, we'll allow for a round of questions. So then we'll have around 2 minutes for each of you to react to the questions. So we could take from the group from the floor. So maybe 2 or 3 questions, and then I give the word back to our panelists. 2 questions, perfect, yeah. All right, okay, we have one hand there, another one. Okay, 2, yeah, so that's it. So I would like to ask the team to assist with the microphone, so we get the translation as well. Thank you very much. So please, yes, raise your hands. Perfect.
Alô? Meu nome é Consolação Udri, eu sou da URI Brasília. E a minha pergunta é para todos os painelistas, a relação entre juros e guerras, diretamente como estão interconectados.
Okay, so I don't think you have the translation. So the question was to all the panelists, and her name is Consolación Udri. She's from the United Religions Initiative, and she asked about the relation between interest and war. Like interest and war. I think that's, I don't know if I'm translating that correctly, but I think that's what yeah, the rate of interest and wars. Yeah, sorry, yeah. And the second question from our friend in the middle. Or maybe we just wait for the translation here. Just one second, please. Pode distribuir os. É para todos, né?
I'm going to ask. Oh, sorry.
Okay, just a second, please, dear.
I'll ask in English. So.
Translation equipment. Okay, yeah, I'll try. Yeah, I'll try to do that. So, yeah, please go ahead.
Okay, is this okay? Okay, thank you. My name is Rabbi Haron Ariel Avi. I'm with the Ortora Interfaith Center. My question is mostly to Eric. You mentioned 2025 as another year of Jubilee. Personally, I'm very involved interested in Shemitah, Jubilee. I think it's a very strong concept we have in the Torah. But 2025 is also the 60th anniversary of the Nostra Aetate, or the famous declaration by the Vatican about other religions. Do you think that there's a way to maybe marry the two and somehow use 2025 as a year of religious-based reconciliation and religious-based economic steps or ideas that we can do together?
Thank you very much. So it was in English. Translation not necessary for you. So now, I mean, one of the questions was specifically directed to Eric, but I'd like to invite all the panelists here and also Elcior to react to both of them as you like. Yeah. So 2 minutes each, and yeah, thank you.
Well, thank you. I'll briefly remark on the question of interest rates and war, and I'm not sure that I'm responding accurately to what you asked. But I think one of the greatest challenges that we've seen with acceleration around poverty, with challenges around debt and the pandemic, is that we're living in a world where more governments are turning towards authoritarianism. The interest rates are contributing to that, as was noted. As the Federal Reserve has raised interest rates, what that has meant for Africa, for Latin America, is that paying the debt becomes more expensive because the interest on the debt. So it's actually moved countries into financial crisis. At this point, around 60 countries have moved or are on the verge of financial crisis, specifically because of the interest rate question. So I think when we're talking about resources and authoritarian governments, we can certainly see how there can be instability and war, and we are living in a moment like that now. The other question, which if I understood correctly, was that this is also a year for celebrating religious congregations in 2025. And I think very much so that these are issues that need to be joined, that the Jubilee as a time of prayer and action is a time where we believe that just as in the past, faith communities need to organize and work together. And because we've successfully done that in the past, we've already proved how we're able to win debt relief, how we're able to win sufficient economic aid, how we're able to move forward policies that can address poverty and protect our climate. And I think with 2025, we have a time where world leaders, the G20, the International Monetary Fund, all know that it's a Jubilee year. And it's really, from our perspective, the most important voice in moving the G20 and a number of these policies is the faith voice. Thank you.
I think that kind of responded to the basic questions. I think everyone here understands the dilemma of the debt crisis, that as the debt payments loom larger and larger, it deprives government of having their own resources to deal with some of the most fundamental challenges that government has and responsibilities that government have in terms of providing for the welfare of all of the peoples here. So that destabilizes countries, which when you have instability, when you have the despair that comes from deprivation, it leads to to conflict. It leads to fighting over resources. It leads to enhanced migration at a time we have more refugees and migrants in the world than at any point in human history, with the enormous responsibilities that places on the international structures here. So all of that is part of it. There was some lessons. You did great work in mobilizing, and David at Bread for the World, mobilizing the community in the last debt crisis. There are some mechanisms that were put in place that have mitigated some of the plunging into absolute collapse that thankfully are working. But as you said, overall, and as we heard from our colleague on the video, it really is a crisis point. And what the G20, what the G7, what the IMF and the other groups do at this particular moment is going to be decisive. So 2025 really is a crucial year. And once again, the fact that it's a Jubilee year is really gives us, as religious people, a kind of moral traction and political traction that otherwise we might not have.
Thank you. Looking at interest rates, why will you even go in for loans? You can see that many a time a loan is the last resort that you have to go in for. It means leadership have interest in going for such loans. And for you to go in for a loan, it means you are going to use it to create value. So where it is not going to be value addition, you don't go in for it. Therefore, if you go in for it, many leaders in Africa go in for it because of the interest they are going to get. And definitely, when the followers or the people get to know that you are using them to enrich yourself, then lead to this kind of wars that we normally will notice within the continent. And currently, as it says, it is important to know that we are unable to pay our debts in Ghana because of a lot of loans that you take that you know very well that you cannot repay. And therefore, it will lead to unsustainability, and therefore, it will lead to war. Secondly, on the issue, if religious leaders, we do not celebrate ourselves, and we do not make our voices heard, political leaders, businessmen will corrupt us. And remember, we are the last resort in society where we are revered. When we lose it, there won't be any society again. It is important and high time that religious leaders, we must celebrate, we must make our voices heard, we must get involved in taking decisions for the general benefit of our people. Thank you.
I don't need to talk. We're in favor of reducing hunger, and so I think let's get to lunch.
Well, I'd like to ask Elcior if he wants to make his final remarks as well.
Okay. So two points. First, interest rates have been an issue that has worried many religions. As you know, some religions, interest rates are not allowed. In some others, interest rates have been capped at some level, and so on and so forth. The interest rates in current times have particularly importance when you have a prevalence of the financial system in the economic dynamic. What I mean by that is that as interest rates become very high, what you're having is that in many countries you have deindustrialization. And linked to this, you have an increase in poverty, inequality, and migration. Historically, the increase in debt and the increase in interest rates have been one of the causes of not only domestic conflict, but also international struggle between nations.
Thank you very much to our panelists. So this is the end of the second plenary. Thank you very much. Again, a round of applause to our guests. And I'll give the floor to Romana to give us some instructions.
Thank you again. And we have now concluded our first morning of the IF20 Brazil 2024. In the afternoon, there will be, this is very important, there will be concurrent sessions from which you can choose to join based on the electronic version of the program. So we hope you have already chosen the ones that you have most interest on. Então, assim concluímos agora a nossa primeira manhã do IF20 Brasil 2024. No período da tarde, haverá sessões simultâneas, das quais vocês poderão escolher participar com base na programação eletrônica. The sessions will take place on the various rooms on this same floor. So besides this auditorium, you will see 5 rooms named EF, M, N, G, and H. These rooms will be marked in the foyer connecting the various rooms. As sessões simultâneas, elas ocorrerão em diversas salas deste mesmo andar. Então, além deste auditório, nós teremos 5 outras salas, denominadas 5EF, M, N, G e H. Essas salas estarão indicadas no foyer que conecta as diversas salas. We kindly remind you that we have an absolute need for punctuality, noting that we have people watching through Zoom and we wish and we are determined to retake our afternoon session at the proposed time, 2:30. Então, gostaríamos de lembrar a vocês da extrema necessidade de pontualidade. Pedimos que todos contribuam de forma que estejamos de volta às sessões simultâneas nas diversas salas neste andar, às 2:30. Finally, after a marvelous work during this morning and after seeing so many religious leaders and leaders from other organizations sensitive, articulated, and determined to contribute greatly to end or to fight against hunger, poverty, and for climate justice, and so many other challenges that the world face. We hope that your hearts and our hearts are filled with deepened strength and determination to joint efforts. Finalmente, depois de período de trabalho inspirador pela manhã, nós esperamos que vocês estejam ainda mais determinados e esperançosos de somar juntos aos esforços em prol da justiça climática e para lutar contra a fome, a miséria e pela paz. Tenhamos todos um bom almoço e nos encontramos aqui de volta às 2:30. Thank you. Obrigada.